Please tell me your name and the name of your spouse.
I'm Ruth W. Thomas, the widow of Bishop James Samuel Thomas.
When and where did you meet each other?
In Sumter, South Carolina.
And when was that?
In I suspect 1938.
And how long were you married?
65 years.
What were the most challenging aspects of ministry in the early days of your life together?
That's difficult to say because we didn't have the normal type beginning. We met when I was in high school and he was in college. It's the kind of complex situation. There were two brothers. One was a Presbyterian minister. The other was a Methodist minister. I was born in Lynchburg, South Carolina, out from Lynchburg, which is a dot on the map between Sumter and Florence, South Carolina. My parents felt that I would be better prepared for college if I went to another high school before entering. And so my aunt was married to the Presbyterian minister, who was also, in addition to being the pastor of Sumter Second Presbyterian Church, was the principal of Kendall Academy. At that time, a lot of churches had academies or schools in connection with the parish. And for 2 years, my last 2 years of high school, I lived with my aunt. And my aunt was married to the Presbyterian brother, as I told you. And there was the Methodist brother was married to a lady whose sister had died very early, leaving 3 children, and my husband was just a toddler. His aunt did not want her sister's children to be separated, and there were members of the family who would take 1 or 2, but nobody really came forward to claim 3. And so my husband's aunt took him and his 2 sisters so that they could be raised together. All of that to say that it was more like a family, like an extended family. I was with my aunt in Sumter. His parents were in Orangeburg, South Carolina, but at the age of 8, his Methodist father now was assigned to Sumter. He was a sophomore at Claflin College. So as he would come to visit his aunt, I was there living with my aunt and her husband, and it was just as though he were cousins because I had, my aunt's daughter was 1 year younger than I, and she was his cousin, so on one side, and I was her cousin on the other side. So then that made us cousins, and it was like family. But I was a junior in high school, and he was a sophomore in college. At that time, nice girls didn't go with college men. You don't hear that term, that really dates me, doesn't it? But at any rate, we had carried this relationship on, I suspect, for about 6 or 7 years, because we would write a card to each other. We got along, we read the Sunday papers together and had a lot of fun. He was a fun person. The reason of that disparity in the age, however, is that he was a very precocious toddler. And when they were in Orangeburg before moving to Sumter, they lived across the street from Claflin College, which also had the academy. And as you know, in those days, they started preschool and went on up to high school. And so since they were so close, his aunt decided to check and see if he could go there so that he could be occupied in a positive manner. And the little boy did the work and kept going. He never entered school at his age. From age 4, he kept going, which meant that he was 4 years ahead of me academically, but only 2 years in actual age. Well, after 9 years, about nine years passed, or so 7 or 9 years, and he would write these cards. We had postal cards which you wrote on one side and addressed the other, and they were 2 or 3 cents. So that's the way we kept in touch, just as friends or cousins, like we did with our cousins. Well, to make a long story short, fast forward. When I finished college and was working in North Carolina, I came home for my summer vacation, and my dad was taking my car from Lynchburg to Sumter to be evaluated and fine-tuned and all of that. You know how fathers are with their daughters. And he was late getting back. In the meantime, I was visiting with my aunt and her mother, who lived with her, my grandmother. And I was sitting, we had the swing, these great big houses with the verandas all around and the swing. I was sitting in the swing, and I happened to look up, and I saw this tall man walking down the street. And I wondered, who in the world can that be? Because at that time, you didn't see tall men walking deliberately, I mean, shoulders back, head up, because it was during the time that they were drafting people to go to war in World War II. And I thought, who in the world can that be? Because the only young men that you saw on the streets were the ones who were rejects almost, either physically or some other deficiency kept them from going into the army. And you just didn't see tall men walking the street with deliberation. And as he neared, I recognized who he was. And I thought, oh my goodness. So when he came, I wondered, because to be sure, all of my friends had gotten married by that time. And so we talked along, and in the meantime, my husband, she said, they called him son. They said, son, are you married or committed? And he said, no. And I had a feeling that was so wonderful, as if this was something about to happen, and it wasn't, because I've always thought of him as my cousin. Well, anyway, we talked and decided we would keep in better touch, and it grew from there, from the friendship to the, well, really we did most of our courting by mail, because I was in North Carolina and at that time.
So were you actually cousins?
No kin at all, by marriage of the men. His aunt and my aunt had married these brothers, and because I went to high school in Sumter, and his father was assigned to the Sumter County area, they moved to Sumter from Orangeburg. We were not, no. When we were on our honeymoon, and later on someone said, oh, you look like sisters and brothers. I said, well, don't do a family tree, and if you find out, don't tell me now.
I understand that your husband played a key role in dismantling the racially segregated central jurisdiction and was the first African American to be appointed bishop in a previously all-white north central jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church. Is that all correct?
That's correct, with an addendum. Bishop Prince Taylor, at the same time that he was assigned to Iowa, was brought from Liberia. In that, during those days, African Americans were sent to Africa to be bishops. But when they got the status of autonomous churches in Africa, and were allowed to elect their own people, then they ceased importing the Americans for their bishops. And so Bishop Prince Taylor had been in Liberia, and that year he and my husband, he was assigned to the New Jersey area and my husband to Iowa.
But he was the first American. does this happen?
No, Bishop Taylor was American.
I see.
So-
Okay.
Because he was with the Central Jurisdiction Advocate.
Okay. So how would you describe how things changed and maybe remained the same during the Central Jurisdiction and after? First, I guess, how things changed from the time of the Central Jurisdiction to when it ended, and the work that you and your husband must have done at that time.
Oh my, that is a complex question that is still unanswered. It was changed in that the structure was changed. My husband worked tirelessly with many groups for the integration with integrity. It's really difficult to recall events and everything because it would be like a movie that you wouldn't think could ever happen. But there were midnight burnings on many occasions and in many places where people got together to talk, to try to use common sense and Christianity in working through not just hurrying to get a hodgepodge situation, but where a truly substantial situation could be brought about so that people could really live out what they were proclaiming, and that is to be respectful to all people, to value all people, and to be fair to all people, and to follow the Ten Commandments.
What do you mean by midnight burnings?
Of the oil, or that means studying, strategizing, trying to figure out how can we best do this without undoing what we have done. What can our attitude be in this without acquiescing to something which we know is not what we want, or is not workable, or is not fair, just to keep from muddying the waters some more. But there were many groups. I remember we were in Nashville at the time. He was at the Board of Education as associate secretary of higher education institutions, and dealt with all of the institutions of black who were either owned or affiliated with the Methodist Church. And so he had privy to a lot of planning, was responsible for a lot of proposing and writing and committees of various sorts. And there was a committee of 5 from the Central Jurisdiction which sought to work out a functional program for the integration. And of course, you know that took a lot of time and energy. And this had to be sold to the church at large. And I don't remember the structure. My memory does not serve me very well at this time. And I didn't have the time, or I don't have the energy to go and research and go back through all of what they went through. But there was a large committee. I think there were about 70 on that committee, and then there were various other areas of concern. And naturally, he was on the one to work with the implementation of the change of the structure, because the structure had to be changed.
So how do you see how things changed as a result of that work?
Well, he was elected a bishop and assigned to an all-white area, and you were legally eligible for membership in any church in the Methodist denomination. Now, there were some areas that were more approachable and that were more appreciative of the process than others. There were some who were adamant in their rejection of the whole thing and did not want it, and it took a long time for it to come about. I shall never forget the people in the North Central jurisdiction were so much more gracious in their really trying to work through to bring about the merger than some others.
Are you thinking of white people in that jurisdiction?
Yeah, because at that time, the church was divided into 5 jurisdictions in the United States. You had the Northeastern, the Southeastern, the North Central, the South Central, and the Western. Those were for the white constituents. For the Afro-American ones, you had all of the states in the central jurisdiction. For instance, Bishop Clare had an area that contained 17 states.
Bishop
Can you
Matthew?
see Bishop,
Matthew?
His name escapes me right.
Matthew?
Matthew Clare, Bishop Matthew Clare. Bishop Clare had 17 states. The Lexington Conference, I think that's what the Lexington, you've heard a lot about, because that was such a large, well, it was 17 states. Now, you tell me, how could anybody expect one man to supervise 17 states? You see, because after the merger, you have some states having 2 areas, like the Dakotas, North and South, had 2 areas. Iowa had 2 areas at one time. When he was assigned there, they had the North Iowa Conference and the South Iowa Conference. There were 2 conferences in the one area. So I mean that the structural change was more manageable for one thing, more equitable.
Did you want to add anything more about other changes that you saw as a result of the central jurisdiction
Well,
going away?
Well, they had to work through the acceptance of pastors one to the other, and that was on both sides. You had to work. It wasn't a one-sided affair. We had our feelings, they had their feelings, and it took a while for our feelings to become our feelings.
What does that mean?
It means that there were some who just didn't want to change.
On either side?
On either side. There still are some who will question. If you don't believe it, just visit and sit quietly and listen.
So there were some African American Methodists who still wish there was a central
No, I can't say that. I don't know, because I haven't been to a general conference since '04. And I don't know, I really don't know what the mood is except what I read, and that's not like being a part when your husband is getting calls and working on committees and whatnot. So I cannot speak intelligently about those things, and I won't try.
Well, I wonder what you can recall was the impact on your family and perhaps children of being in a ministry in a segregated church.
Well, my children grew up. See, because it was segregated on all of their life. No. Before they were born, the integration came after the older ones were born. You say, what was it like? How can you say what it was like? When, for instance, when my husband was working at Gammon in the beginning, when it was located in South Atlanta, before it became a part of the ITC complex now. In the late 40s, that was. Everything we did was it was just with Afro-Americans. Now, we could have other people come into ours, but we could not go into theirs. And I remember when my husband was a student and working very early, when they were beginning to work with this, the young people played a great part in this. They would invite people, and I remember once my husband was invited to somewhere, wherever Leesville, Florida is. Leesburg, Florida. The young people, they had a very strong young adult section of the church at that time. Jameson Jones, I know you've seen his name if you don't remember him, but he did a great work with the young adults, but with the youth. And they invited him to go. And so they had him to sit in the back seat of the car with a white person on each side and people, so that he wouldn't be seen, because life and limb were at stake. I mean, that's the way it was. And I remember one summer, my husband was asked to be acting president while President Richardson went on a trip.
Acting president of?
Gammon, when it was in Southwest Atlanta. And President Richardson was going to be away for the summer, and my husband, as young as he was asked to be the one to hold the fort while he was gone. And there was a meeting, they had meetings, and the meeting was held on Gammon's campus. And there were white students from Emory over there. Somehow they got hold of it, and the school had a time explaining and dealing with that. I don't remember, and it wouldn't serve any purpose to go through that now. But it was one of those things, anything that was done had to be done undercover. It could not be done. But I mean, the young people worked through a lot of those ways and helped to establish communication areas. And so were the other parts of the church, because many times my husband and I were parts of a group that would be called to discuss. I remember one night at the Board of Education, we were meeting, and some young people were there from, not, when I say young people, I don't mean children, I mean adults who were working people with, adult jobs, but they were sitting discussing, they were leadership persons. And so one of the young men said, he said, this is wonderful. He said, but I've never seen black people like this. The only black people I've seen are those working on my father's farm. And therein was a lot of the problems, because there was no communication. You were little children, your mother could even nurse the children and take care and fix their food, but they couldn't sit next to each other on the bus and whatnot. And while we were at Gammon in the late 40s, we were in an integrated situation, because on Gammon's campus, there were white and Afro-American professors, and they all lived together on the campus. But once you went outside the confines of those wrought iron fences, it was no more, there's no Gammon atmosphere. And my children, the first two children, wanted to ride the bus so much. They, Mama, why can't we go downtown on the bus rather? And so we didn't want to worry their little minds. We just said, honey, we can get there so much quicker in the car. And we can and we won't have to wait. So you have to stand and wait until the bus. We didn't tell the truth, but we didn't tell a lie. The whole truth is that we aren't allowed to go unless you sit in the back, and we aren't going to sit in the back of the bus.
So it sounds like your family was affected both by the segregation in general as well as the segregation within the church.
Oh, sure. Everybody was affected by the segregation in general. You could not travel and have accommodation anywhere. I mean, the parks were for white only. Wherever there were fountains, you had your white only and your black only. Why?
Drinking fountain.
Drinking fountain. Yes. You could not get a sandwich. You could be as hungry as you wanted to be. You could smell the fried chicken and what have you, but you couldn't go in. And if you could, you had to go around to the back through a window, and they passed the things through the window.
What were the differences, if you had any sense of that, of the roles of non-African American spouses and African American spouses of clergy in the Methodist Church?
I can't talk about the non-clergy because I had no way of knowing. I didn't have any close friends before integration.
You mean as far as non-African Americans?
Non-African.
Right. Mhm. So it's sort of hard to give a. Did you ever have the sense that the African American spouses were in sort of a special situation or a disadvantaged situation?
At that time, when you see it now, you can see how disgustingly unfortunate it was. But at that time, it was just normal. Nobody was satisfied, but nobody. I don't know. As a child, I just can't. I don't know what they thought, because so many of the people where we lived were not even of our denomination. There were more Baptists and more AAMEs. For instance, where I grew up, we had to go 15 miles to Mother and Dad's church when they got married. They lived near Sumter, South Carolina. But then when they got married, they lived in Lynchburg, because that's where my father's father was and where the home was, the homestead. But there was not a Presbyterian church within 15 miles. And Mother and Daddy didn't want to leave the Presbyterian church. So they kept their membership. We worshiped at the churches in the community, but we kept our membership, and it was during horse and buggy days. That was a long time ago. But I mean, I was just a child, and a lot of that went over my head.
As the spouse of a church leader, how was your career impacted?
Well, my career ended at a certain point. I always looked forward to make $5,000 a year. The very year that I was going to make $5,000, guess what? My husband was elected a bishop. We had a second grader and a fifth grader, plus 2 high school children. We had lived, moved, and had our being in the black community, except for the time that we were at Gammon, all the while. Absolutely no contact except going into the stores, buying things, not trying on hats and dresses and shoes, going in and buying them. Okay, then that's the way it was in the beginning. So then how did that impact us? There was nothing to do, but just do it. You know you didn't like it. You didn't want, suppose it didn't fit you right. It was too bad. But after it was over, you could see the difference. But we felt that the children, at that time, we had one daughter was almost ready for college, and the other was going to be ready in a couple of years. And then we had this second grader and this fifth grader when he was elected. So that meant then that they needed parental presence. They couldn't grow up like weeds, and they needed somebody on call constantly. The bishop is not a stay at your home and work out of your home. You are all over the place and other places. You cannot be at home. So I thought it doesn't make sense to sacrifice our children's future and well-being. So we decided that I would just be a stay-at-home mom.
But what was your career that you had?
Public school teacher. I was a public school teacher. And I had looked forward to get this salary that I was going to make over $5,000. Okay, and then years passed, and I worked off and on, the family was always number one, because when he was with the Board of Education, he had to travel as much as he did because there were 12 institutions, Daytona Beach, all of the black colleges that were either owned or related to the church. And so his was out most of the time. When he was home, he was home. But he couldn't be depended on to get them hither, thither, and yon to Girl Scouts and all of those things. So I worked tirelessly both times with whatever the kids were involved in. I worked voluntarily. So some weeks I had every day out for something, either Bluebirds or Girl Scouts or school advisory boards or the Y. Wherever we lived, we always joined the Y, because that was the one place the children could get the social aspect, upward movement. They couldn't go to horse riding academies on their own. There are just a lot of things they couldn't do. And the charm schools in the stores at that time, I don't know whether they still have those or not, but the department stores would have these charm schools to teach young girls the social graces and whatnot. Well, but the Y provided that in all of the cities, and so I spent a lot of time in volunteer work and helping, so that I could be with my children.
So what change was accomplished under the leadership of your spouse and yourself?
Well, we were not in the South when leadership changed. It took a long time for the South to change. It had to be a gradual thing. And you began to have more and more people after Bishop Taylor and Sammy were appointed to those areas. They found that intelligent African Americans were intelligent people. They were not spectacles. How many times in a receiving line somebody said, one time, you wouldn't know he was a black man if you didn't look at him.
That's what white people said to you?
Yes.
And how did you respond?
And I said, well, he doesn't think of himself as a black man. He thinks of himself as one who was fortunate enough to be an educated man. And from the pulpit he said, and I echoed it many, many times, he was not assigned there to be a black bishop. He was assigned as the bishop of the Methodist Church. It was Methodist when he was elected. And that finally caught on. And that he wasn't trying to be, an outstanding black person. He wanted to be a God-fearing human person. And that was his signature. Reconciliation and equality were his signatures. And I followed that, and we tried to instill that in our children. So that's why we didn't expose them to situations where we could avoid them experiencing the ugly side of the racial issue. We tried, because they're working the way we did. We were very fortunate all of our married life not to have had some of the experiences that many of our people have had. In the first place, our parents taught us good manners, respectability, respect other people, and demand respect for yourself. Stay out of situations where you make yourself a target. A lot of times we get into trouble because we make ourselves targets. So we didn't do that. We avoided those situations. But that does not mean that because we were meek and mild, we were appeasing when things went wrong. I can't keep you from stepping on my toe. I said, oh, excuse me, please, you're on my toe. If you stay there, I said, you are on my toe, then it's time for you to move off my toe. So it was that kind of feeling that we had. We always said we would try not to be the one to cause it, but we will stand up for what we thought was right And we tried to do that with the children. And that's the way my husband did throughout his career. And he was respected, not always liked, but highly respected because they knew that he would work fairly. And when issues came up as he worked, he would put the problem on the table instead of under the table, handing this or this and appeasing that one. Put it on the table, let the chips fall where they may. Sometimes they hurt very much. But all of the time there was a respect at the end of it. And so that was, and I don't know when it started or where, but one thing, we depended on the Lord a lot. And I think that was the secret of it.
Were you going to say something more there?
No,
Okay. I understand that you have led orientation workshops for bishops' wives.
right.
And I'm wondering what were some of the main pieces of advice you gave them, or what did you tell them that they should expect or not expect?
Well, one of the, when I would lead these leadership things, it depended, I mean, they had very different, a lot of different themes and whatnot, you might know. But I guess the basic thing was, you can't get away from the commandments. If you look at the commandments, you've got your base. Because if you love God and depend on Him, you don't walk alone. If you love other people as you love yourself, you're not going to steal from your sister because you don't want her to steal from you. And with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you're not going to tell a lie on somebody to defame their character if you don't want them to tell a lie on you. And if you don't feel like working for something or don't have it, don't envy somebody else who goes out and toils and gets it, and then I'm as good as she, why can't I? Mine was more a common sense and a fair play. I guess that would be my signature. I don't know. I haven't been asked this question before.
And your lessons to your fellow clergy spouses was for black and white alike?
Oh, yes. Oh, there was no difference. I didn't do one for one and another for another. I took the human. That was my husband and I both. The human. I told Sammy the racial issue is a smokescreen for a lot of human cussedness. And it is. Take the human cussedness out of it, and you will find, if you do a force field, you'll find it on both sides. And conversely, because of the way we worked with Gammon, see, Gammon was an interracial adventure situation before it was dared brought to the public. But we got along fabulously. In fact, one of the professors paid the last $300 on our Ford car when my husband got a scholarship to go to Ithaca for his doctorate. Dr. Guptill, who was then one of the professors at Gammon, had his Sunday school class. I don't remember which one of the churches, but and it was a white church in Atlanta. And we owed $300 on I remember our little Ford, 2 children in the Ford. And somehow Dr. Guptill found out that was that balance. And of course, the scholarship did not cover your personal expenses, you know. And so to keep us from having to deal with that, his Sunday school class, and we can't forget things like that.
And
Okay.
did your husband get to Cornell?
Cornell University. That's where he got his PhD. Okay, another good thing that happened with the PhD work, which also has made me think of and dwell on the positive side of as a humanist, Dr. Felder, who was his major professor at Drew University in rural sociology.
Dr. Felder's first name is?
Felton,
Felton.
who was the head of the department at Drew University.
What was his whole name, please?
Dr. Felton, Dr. Ralph Felton from Drew University. My husband he had the GEB scholarship for 2 years.
GEB.
General Education Board. And he went to Ithaca because Ithaca specialized in rural social, among other things. It had so much.
That was an expertise at Cornell.
Right, in Ithaca, New York. He did his coursework, 2 years coursework, because he had a 2-year leave from Gammon to work. So he finished everything going summer and winter. I came to South Carolina and stayed with my parents while he was doing that. When he got his field work, needed to get his field work done, he rather do that by interviewing himself rather than using the material from the database, which Cornell had, and he could have done that. But being what he wanted to know, so he went to those farms in Virginia, South Carolina, Arkansas. There was another, I don't remember whether it was Alabama, but anyway, one of those others. Dr. Felton, by this time, had retired. He got his master's degree from Drew University before we were married. Okay, Dr. Felton and his wife came to Gammon, took over Sammy's classes so that he could be free to work on his dissertation. You see, that's why I can't just say be done with anything that's non-African American. We have been too well partnered through too much. And we have seen, for instance, my father could not get a loan for my college work when I was in college. He could get a loan from the bank for fertilizer for his cotton and tobacco, but not for me to go to college. He had to go out of town to another bank. And so, I mean, those are the kinds of things that you grew up with. Well,
I wanted to clarify that your husband's nickname was Sammy.
Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
His name was James Samuel Thomas.
But you called him?
I called him Sammy.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Because those other girlfriends had called him Jim or Tom. I didn't want him to be saying sweet nothings to me, thinking of hearing. I was very broad-minded, but I was very selfish with my own. And so I asked my son, do you mind if I call you Sammy? And he did. He said, whatever you call me, I'll answer. So that was all I needed. So people who met him after me know who Sammy is. The others don't know that it's Jim or Tom.
I want to ask you about what problems you see persisting for the church to this day.
I think each person is, as I told you, I'm out. The world has been passing me by. We've been through so much since his retirement. And as I told you, I haven't been to a general conference or jurisdictional conference or annual conference since '04. And I have forgotten a lot. And I have not kept up because of things. So I really can't speak intelligently about those things. It's opinion based on my experience. So that would be at variance with a lot of public opinion these days, I'm sure.
So would you be willing to say anything that you see as sort of the problem that persists now?
Well, I see so much instant gratification. Things just don't come all of a sudden. Nothing, what is it? No loss, no gain. No pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. No gain. You do have to work for what you get. My husband and I had 65 years of marriage. He's been gone. Next month will be 5 years. And I still haven't turned them loose yet. Because so much, we had so many things in common. We were never in competition with each other. We were very both supportive of each other. But one thing we knew before we got married, that we had a common cause in our general interests and outlook on life. That was the first thing that we were older. We were not, we didn't rob cradles. He was 26 and I was 24. So we were old enough to know what life was all about and what to expect. And we also learned early that there's no such thing as 50-50 in a marriage. Sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's 40-60, sometimes it's 51-49. And if you know that, and then on the other hand, if you say, if he can put up with me if I did this, I ought to be able to put up with him with that. And then to say, now if I throw him away, what will I do? Or if I throw her away, what will I do? You know, just the common sense things. And the other thing is not to harbor bad feeling, but to talk it out and see what can be done about it and have a compromise with integrity. Okay, he let me know in the beginning that he did not like to cook and would not be good at doing the girls' hair. Well, I knew not to ask him to cook or do the girls' hair. I never had to scrub the kitchen floor or the bathroom. He did the scrubbing. I would dust other things, but there are certain things that you know are not easy, and you don't make it easy. When you know what your partner's Achilles heel is, don't go to that place. Avoid it if you can. And if you can't, sit down. We need to talk. I really didn't like it when you did such and such a thing. I remember one time we were talking, and I said, without thinking, I said, don't talk to me in that tone of voice. He said, what did you say? I said, don't talk to me in that tone of voice. And he didn't talk to me in that tone of voice anymore because he knew that I didn't like that. More than what he said, it was the way you can call someone dear in a way that is very obnoxious. And so we learned that early. I don't know how we did, but you just learn, if you learn from experiences, for one thing, though.
We've talked a bit about situations confronting you and your husband relating to race. Did you have any situations confronting issues related to gender?
Yeah, but
you personally.
What we feel about how to ask that question again.
So we talked a lot about the challenges in the church related to race and your life and your husband's life. But I'm wondering if there were situations that you confronted related to gender, you personally.
To me, that
you dealt with. Did you have challenges because of your gender?
You mean with other people?
Yeah, not with your husband.
My gender.
Well, I guess I wonder whether you had issues of, say, discrimination because you were a woman, or was that not a big issue because you were so busy?
Well, it was one of those. I guess that's why I'm a teacher, because when I came along, you were only, if you were a woman, an educator, you were only a nurse or a teacher or a domestic worker. I majored in home economics, I guess, because women were not into politics and things like that. But because of my nature, I have always been more one to excel in a supportive rather than a leadership role, because I realize that the leader sets the tone. And sometimes if the leader is confronted with something that they can't handle, the whole project fails to reach its potential. And I don't know, but I guess if it had been open to me when I was coming along, or if it was open, I'm sure, I don't know whether I would have been, but I still like teaching because I like sharing, and I like meeting people, a lot of people. I did a lot of it when he was working, that's what I did. And I believe in being prepared for what I can do. But one thing I'm a great believer in a strong family, because I think a strong family, units of a strong family are the only way that our communities are going to be healthy, happy places. You can't shoot your way through a community and be happy. You can't steal your way through a community and be happy. You can't stay in the street and leave your children at home by themselves for them to grow up in ways that they should. The family needs to be cohesive. They need to learn to respect each other as they respect other people. They need to take pride in each's accomplishment. And so I don't know, I guess maybe because of the time I was born, when mother and dad, even though they disciplined us greatly, we appreciate what they did for us. And that carried over into my marriage and my dealing with other people. And whatever we have done, when I was a teacher, I know that I was a good teacher. I was prepared to teach in the high school, but Methodist ministers move around so much, and you can't find vacancies in home economics. Home economics teachers are the most staying. They're like the Rock of Gibraltar. They don't move. And so I could never find an opening, but there were always openings in the elementary school, because a lot of women especially were working, helping their husbands go to school. That's when the women were working and promoting their husbands rather than themselves, as we are now, because they couldn't become the career people. So that was because of the nature of future job employment.
What do you believe Black people and other people of color contributed to the life of the United Methodist Church during the ministry shared by you and your spouse?
I don't know. Well, I don't know, except the recommendation and the way that we conducted ourselves gave people to know that we were human first, who happened to be Black, and we're proud of it. Not that we feel that it supersedes white, just like we have never accepted that white supersedes Blacks. And with getting that instilled in our children. And I think that the respect for personhood is a major consideration. It's a good character building attribute, because if you respect other people, most of the time they will respect you.
Black Methodists for Church Renewal has a Bishop James and Ruth Thomas
Yeah.
Youth and Young Adult Endowment Fund for youth training and attendance at Methodist-related meetings.
Mhm.
Is that important to you to have this kind of youth involvement in organizations like that?
Well, yes, I think so, because at least it gives them a sense of their worth. Because I remember at one time, anything Black was not considered beautiful. But out of that strife, out of the struggle for equality came, somehow people suddenly realized Black is beautiful. They hadn't seen all of the pretty Black suits that men wear. They hadn't seen all of the pretty Black hair that women were crowned on their heads with. They hadn't seen all of the good, clean homes that Blacks were doing, even though it was meant to be subservient, I'm sure. It wasn't elevated in the thinking of people who did it. But but when people found out that it is not the color, it's what the color represents.
What do you think the church will look like in future generations?
I wonder about that. I wonder because there is so much God taken out of everything that we do now. And God says that my mind is so far above yours. We haven't learned that yet. We haven't learned that our plans cannot compete with God's plans. When we learn that, it'll be better. I won't see it, but it will.
What do you think, as far as a story, perhaps a brief one, that you might convey about your struggles and joys in the years of retirement? Is there anything basic you'd say about your life as a retired person?
Well, as long as my husband was able to go, I didn't know that we were retired. Because I still believe in keeping life in living, and living as long as you have life. That's why I'm here talking to you today. I am so limited in what I can do and what I can't do. But I am so grateful because there is so much that I can do. And because I've done that, it hasn't just started after I retired. It's a continuation of what has happened. And just a couple of days ago, I had a young friend who came by. She has a sister living in Atlanta. And I don't know, you don't know her, but she was a minister, and she grew up in Sumter, South Carolina, Mamie Williams, from the Baltimore, Washington area. But I mean, my husband was a mentor of hers. She still comes to see me, and she calls me 2 or 3 times a month. Those things where people have still kept ties to me and still keep in touch when we have left so many years ago the active arena, it is really a wonderful and heartwarming feeling that you have when you're not on the shelf, when you can't do. I can't do. Now, I'm one of those who the preacher preaches about that comes to church for an hour on Sunday. Well, I do go 2 hours. I stay the whole time. But I'm not able to be a part of commission. In my early days, I was always a part of the church's ministries, of doing something with a responsibility. As I told you before, I shied away from leadership responsibilities because my family comes first. And I don't believe in saving the world and leaving your own children. Now, I think my children need to be guided and whatnot as well as others. But the energy that I can use for both and, I gladly do. But I don't put anything above my family. That family comes first.
I just have a couple more questions because of the next
Well,
steps
before you say something else, I don't feel that this hasn't been much. I've been talking about me most of the time without saying, but I haven't. I look at these people who have strings of things that they have done, and they have done this and done, and I haven't done it, and yet people come and tell me about things, and they will, out of the clear blue, I get friends. But I don't, well, what am I doing? Am I false or something? But people are wonderful. I'm finding during this time, especially during the incapacitation of my husband and myself, people have come to us and reached out to us and prayed for us. People that I don't know still come up and will tell me that something that my husband said, or they remember that I was at a certain place and I said this, and I don't have the slightest idea how it was not, because it was just natural.
I was just going to ask you whether the service of your spouse, how that affected his life, health, and the life of your family.
Well, I think that's where our strength has come from. My husband, and here I go again, I know I brag about him a lot, but I'm living so on the strength of things that I gained from the 65 years that we were together. First of all, he was a God-centered person. He had his devotions. He believed in excellence of performance. He does not believe in judging yourself by what other people do, but doing the best that you can. And so he would have his devotions every morning when he was active and not. He couldn't, before he retired, of course, he couldn't have the time that he had after retirement. But when he had a project to work on, a sermon to prepare, a lecture to do, he had resources. He didn't depend on his own mind, but he would have his devotional time with the Lord, with his Bible reading, and with books of people who had written on subjects. He did research and depended on the Lord, and then took the time. He would write it out and then have the secretary, when he was not retired, to type it. So he would have his work done. I remember when we were at a little church in York, South Carolina, shortly after we were married, before he was the chaplain in South Carolina State College when we were married. And then after a while, for about a year and a half, he was at a small church in South Carolina. And he had a little church, a little family church with about 25 members. And one day, after he had done the message for the church in the little city in York, he was working on the sermon. I said, "Honey, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm on getting my sermon right for hope." I said, "But you already did the one for why don't you use?" He said, "Ruth, the hope people are not the York people. They have different problems, and I need to address those problems." I said, "Well, honey, you talk about the problems of them too." He said, "You do not hold a group of people captive because they are sitting listening to you. So you have something prepared for them and say, I need to sit down and think about what these people are going through, and I need to give them hope for what they are doing, not for what the people in York are doing." So.
All right. You just told me about some memorable years of your marriage. Is there anything that you regret during the ministry shared with your spouse?
Let's see, what would I can't think of anything. Maybe some things I may have done differently. I don't know. I can't think of anything because I tried to do things in the light of the information I had at the moment.
Okay. Of all the things you've done in your life, what was the greatest blessing?
Of all the things oh my goodness. And this is one of the things I'm talking. I was just me. I did whatever I could to the best of my ability. That I guess it's using my ability to the best advantage.
And what does your faith mean to you, or how has it sustained you?
My faith means everything to me because it gives me a sense of, it gives me a sense of the staying power of my faith when things go wrong. So when my husband died, 3 months later, my oldest daughter died. I guess that was the most trying time of my life, during October and January of '05 and '06, going through those two things. And the time leading up to that were 2 years when my husband was an invalid, when there was nothing that I could do to help him. At times he couldn't talk. At times he couldn't swallow and had to be fed intravenously and with the peg. Though I think those would have been the darkest times. Other times, my mother died on Christmas Day in 1976. I've had a lot of things to go through, but I have been sustained by the prayers of friends as well as me, and by the support of family and friends, especially the support of family. And that, because when I think of my situation without my children, the way they support me now, I don't know how I could make it. And if none of my friends, when I think about all of these people that still reach out to me, but there's nothing I can do now. I don't even know the people that they deal with now, so there's nothing I can do for them but just smile at them, and shake their hands and hug them. Just thanking God for the power of friends and family and staying close to the Lord and using common sense. Now, I don't take risks that I know of. I do a lot of silly things, but they are unwittingly done. So I try to use common sense, and I try to treat everybody the way I want to be treated. And I try to measure what I say to people. There are certain circumstances that I'm at a loss as to what to say. So then I don't say anything. I just say, I'm here. If you need me, I'm here. So that's why I'm at a loss to tell you, to answer these questions you've asked, because I just go along being me, and that's what I've done with my family and my friends, and with, but whatever, if I say I'm going to do something, I'll do the best, and I'll research it and try to know what I'm talking about if you ask me to make a speech, but I don't rush to do that.
You've been very kind. I'm afraid that we have to conclude, but I thank you so much for answering all my questions, unless there's something quick that we didn't cover that you really wish I had asked you.
Okay. I can't think of anything right now.
Okay, and I just would want, if you don't mind, would you tell me your age and your birth date, please?
I am 94 years old. My birthday is February 15th, 1921.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.